I'm with Danny Stone from the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust. Now, Danny, what is the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust?
Well, thank you for having me. The Anti-Semitism Policy Trust is a charity. We work to educate decision makers about anti-Semitism, and we do that in part through providing the secretariat to the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism in the UK Parliament. So that's a bipartisan group or a cross-party group, and to the government, the British government's advisor on anti-Semitism, Lord Mann.
Does politics have a problem with anti-Semitism?
Everywhere has a problem with anti-Semitism. There's no sector or area that is untouched by it. Certainly in politics, we've seen problems over many years. As I say, it's an entirely cross-party issue. So each party has had its own specific problems. That can be with members of parliament, it can be with local councillors, it can be with activists, it can be online on social media. But each party has its own, as I say, specific issues. And sometimes those are complex or multi-layered. But yes, politics has an issue. One need only look at, in the past couple of weeks, we've had a Liberal Democrat councillor who was expelled from the party and then arrested for comments that she made about Jews, referencing Jews as vile. There was a Conservative councillor, I think possibly a former mayor, that the party had to take action over. There was a candidate for the Labour Party in an area of England known as Rochdale, called Rochdale, where there were concerns about some anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that the candidate had voiced. And so, even as I say, in the past few weeks, it's evident that there's a problem in politics.
Obviously, you can disagree with policies that Israel has, but how do you define anti-Semitism? Is there a very, very fine line between disagreeing with something that's Israeli and anti-Semitism?
Look, there is a globally agreed definition of anti-Semitism, which is the IHRA definition, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism definition was put together by practitioners, people who were trying to understand and record anti-Semitism and data about anti-Semitism, who didn't have a shared way of understanding it, particularly in respect to the anti-Semitism that was occurring within the framing of the Middle East conflict. Now, what that definition does, it's a kind of a formulation of words and 11 accompanying examples, some of which help to explain where anti-Semitism, as I say, occurs within the kind of the Middle East conflict or the framing of the Middle East conflict. Now, at the beginning of the definition, it's clear that criticism of Israel, as one would criticize any other country, is not anti-Semitic. It explains what may or may not be anti-Semitic, not what is or is not. And it requires an understanding of the overall context of a particular incident in order to help advise on whether something is anti-Semitic. Now, of course, people are free to criticize Israel. That's absolutely fine. People do it all the time. Israelis do it, and Jews across the world have done it. But we have seen, for example, ancient tropes, the blood libel, conspiracy theories used in the discourse around the Middle East conflict. And it's those kind of things where it goes over a line. And the IRA definition helps to sketch out some of those issues, albeit taking into account the various caveats that I outlined.
Now, just for instance, recently we've seen South Africa take Israel to court over genocide. Now we
Mm-hmm.
see that things are happening with Ukraine and Russia. We have situations in Syria. So, would you call that anti-Semitism because they're just singling out Israel but not picking on anybody else?
I think different people will have different views on it. Look, there is a process, right, in the international court to try cases, and the court will determine whether or not that case has been met. So far, the determination has been that it is not genocide. And people throw that word around quite loosely. And I think that our language is really important. Do I think that there is something, and I've been playing this out recently with people, I think that that word is used a lot about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And I think that in a context in which there has been anti-Semitism over hundreds of years, including the blood libel, which suggests that Jews have a lust for blood, right? That Jews are all powerful and evil and what have you. Do I think the word genocide perhaps can be used in anti-Semitic context or to try and present an anti-Semitic narrative? Yes, I do. Does that mean everyone that uses the word or makes that charge is an anti-Semite? No, I don't think that. But I do think that we need to be careful about the language that we use. I think we need to be specific about the kind of the framing of what we're saying. And I do think there can be circumstances, as I say, in which that word can be used in anti-Semitic ways, and there's a wider backdrop that needs to be considered in reference to that charge, and why it is that it's used less frequently, I think, in respect of other conflicts, some of which you outlined.
Politicians got a bigger understanding of anti-Semitism now.
They do. As I say, I've been very clear that anti-Semitism is a cross-party problem, but certainly in recent years, when the Labour Party was in a crisis of anti-Semitism, they had repeat incidents, they had institutional failures in respect of dealing with those incidents. It was repeatedly in the news. And it being in the news and it being a political issue meant that MPs were more regularly exposed to discussion of it and were reading about it and were having conversations and meetings about it. And so I think the level of understanding amongst members of parliament has increased because they've read about it, they've seen it, they've had meetings about it. And so too this conflict and the correlation in relation to the attacks on British Jews has meant that MPs need to be better informed about anti-Semitic impacts, and they are. So, I mean, that is a good thing. It's important that members of parliament and indeed other decision makers understand anti-Semitism in the same way they need to understand other forms of hate. And so my conversations with them can be more sophisticated about what we do about it.
Has there been a big rise in anti-Semitism in the UK since the 7th of October massacre and Israel's war with Hamas?
Yes, there has been. So last year, we have an organisation in the UK named the Community Security Trust. They have been taking reports of incidents of anti-Semitism since the mid-1980s. For 2023, the number of anti-Semitic incidents it recorded was 4,103 incidents. That is the largest number of incidents that has ever been recorded by the CST since it started recording incidents. About 2/3 of those incidents occurred after the 7th of October. The increase in incidents started almost the day of the 7th of October, and the highest number of daily incidents that were recorded by the CST took place on the 11th of October, 4 days after Hamas's attacks and before the Israeli response to those attacks. So the CST analysis is that it was the Hamas attacks which inspired the anti-Semitism, not the Israeli response. And remember that in the UK, Jews number 270,000 odd people, according to the census. That's 0.5% of the population. And those incidents, each one, doesn't just impact the individual who is subjected to the attack or the abuse, but impacts them, their family, their wider community, their friends, and so on and so forth. So the ripple effects of 4,103 incidents against this tiny community has been significant. And the Jewish community in the UK is feeling very, very vulnerable as a result.
Have the marches in London shocked you?
I've been surprised. I'm not surprised that there is an outpouring of support for Palestinians. I understand why people want to go and march, and I understand some of the feelings of some of the protesters. What shocked me has been how frequently one can find anti-Semitic placards, chants, or activity in and amongst those protests. We've had more than 600 arrests. There have been placards that have depicted blood libels, ancient conspiracy theories, outright anti-Semitism. We've had the genocidal chant from the river to the sea repeated and indeed projected onto Big Ben, onto the Elizabeth Tower, which stands part of Parliament. And there have been a number of intimidatory tactics used in some of these marches. So I've been deeply, deeply concerned about those aspects of the marches. I try very hard to be clear that not every individual who's on the marches is hateful. They're certainly not anti-Semitic. People have a right to protest. It's important that they do. But there are important elements of that need to be recognised and dealt with severely by police and other relevant authorities.
Yeah, I was going to ask, we've had from the river to the sea on Big Ben. What does that mean? And is that anti-Semitic?
So not everyone who uses it is anti-Semitic or intends to use it in an anti-Semitic way. But there is no question that that phrase has been used to mean clearing all the Jews of Israel out of that space. It's been used that way by Osama bin Laden. It's been used that way by Hamas leaders. It's been used that way by Saddam Hussein. And it has, the way I put it is, if you're unclear about a chance genocidal intent, then why would you want to use it? There are far better phrases to use. And projecting it onto the Elizabeth Tower, onto Big Ben, which is the bell within the tower, projecting it onto the Elizabeth Tower was a deliberate act of essentially trolling, of provocation. And so I think that there needs to be a more serious discussion about the impact of that phrase and its real meaning. Because, as I say, while some people may chant it generically or try to use it to signal that they want peace, that is not how it is used. I don't think that's how it was created, and the impact of it is really significant.
I have a feeling that the police said there was nothing wrong with that being on Big Ben. Was that a shock and a surprise to you?
Yeah, the police said that it depends on the context of the way in which the chant is used, whether or not it's actionable. I think there needs to be a bit of a wider discussion about what can and should be projected onto Big Ben. As I say, specifically, I think we need another discussion with police and relevant authorities about that specific chant and what it means.
Does the UK have a problem with anti-Semitism in its universities?
On campus, we've had significant problems. The Union of Jewish Students has reported across different campuses that there have been death threats sent to JSOCs. JSOCs have been intimidated. Zoom meetings, for example, have been Zoom bombed and people said anti Semitic things. Students on campus have had anti Semitic engagements, so like people shouting at them or abusing them. There's been a rise in the number of anti Semitic incidents. But I think it's not just the incidents themselves, it's this kind of chill factor. It's the idea that Jewish students aren't free to express themselves as Jews on campus. And that was the subject of a report that Lord Mann did, looking at the state of university campuses across the UK, a very wide-ranging and broad report in respect of what universities can do. It made a number of recommendations, positive action that universities could take. And it also highlighted that there was good practice and that, students, generally speaking, can do and should feel safe, but there is this problem and there's no getting away from it. And whether that is speakers coming on and saying anti-Semitic things, anti-Semitic incidents, or attacks on individual students or Jewish societies, it is there. And the Union of Jewish Students is having to work very hard to ensure that Jewish students in their various universities feel supported and can take action where these cases arise. So too, I was in a meeting today with the National Union of Students. They've had a number of issues over a number of years with anti-Semitism at their conferences and in and around the kind of that activity that the NUS does. But they've got an anti-Semitism advisory panel now, and they've got a number of actions and activities and strategies for addressing this. So there is a mixed picture out there, but definitely there is a problem.
Has it shocked you to see posters of hostages being taken down? We've seen all these videos on social media where people have been taking down the posters. Has that shocked you and surprised you?
Yes, I think to tear down a poster, I think there's one of these moments when I do training on anti-Semitism. I make this point about the conflict, and I say, don't hold people collectively accountable, don't expect them to have a view on the conflict. But one of the things I say is be kind. And it strikes me that to tear down a poster of a hostage on a human level, let alone the Israel-Palestine conflict, whatever people think about this, or Hamas, to tear down a poster of somebody that has been kidnapped and held hostage at a human level, that is really deeply troubling. There was a case in the CST incidents report of a baby that had had a Hitler moustache drawn onto it, who's been held hostage, and just the kind of the depravity of someone doing that Holocaust inversion, the actual act of doing it, I find really upsetting. And as I say, not as an anti-Semitism expert, but just on a human level, I find that deeply, deeply upsetting.
Now you hold events. What sort of events do you hold?
Yes, so we do them in our own right and together with the All Party Parliamentary Group Against Anti-Semitism. We did one yesterday with a group of academics, universities, others who have been looking at anti-Semitism on the internet. It's called the Decoding Anti-Semitism Project. We had experts in the room from the tech sector or the NGOs that work in the tech sector, members of parliament and others, and they got a better understanding of the anti-Semitic response online following the 7th of October attacks. But we hold events all the time on a range of different things, and whether that be on education, whether it be on online harm, whether it be about conspiracy theories, which we did at the political party conferences this year. We do different events that focus on different aspects of anti-Semitism.
You feel safe in the UK now?
Personally speaking, yes, I do. And I kind of always, when I'm talking about anti-Semitism, I'm keen to point out that the Jewish community is well integrated in the UK, has a range of different amazing kind of organizations and events. There's Jewish Book Week, Jewish Film Festival, and what have you. But I know both from polling, from anecdotal conversations, and from the general sense of what I'm getting from the people I'm speaking to out there, that there is a real palpable fear that some people are considering leaving the UK because they are very deeply worried about the situation vis-a-vis anti-Semitism, that people feel that in a number of sectors following the 7th of October attacks, that the response has been poor or that the incidents have been so numerous or certainly high profile that, it no longer feels safe out there. And particularly when it comes to, let's say, poor policing or issues with the judiciary, that tends to undermine confidence in the institutions that are there to keep people safe. So I understand why people feel that way. As I say, personally, I think we have some of the best race relations laws in the world. I think we have a number of reasons to be confident in our safety in the UK. But I do think that there are problems, and I do understand why people are concerned and some are fearful and want to leave.
Are Jews actually hiding their Jewishness?
Yeah, I know of cases of individuals covering their kippah, their head covering, or putting away a Magen David, a Star of David necklace, or other things. So that definitely happens.
Mm. We've talked about the negative side. Are you actually getting an encouragement side as well? Are you hearing people coming and talking to you and saying that we encourage you and we support you as Jewish people?
Definitely. So, I mean, government and opposition parties have been robust, outspoken, and very clear about their opposition to anti Semitism. That's hugely important. I have been doing training across lots of different sectors, the NHS, government, local government, and the cultural sector. And many times it's because there are individuals there, Jewish or not Jewish, who want to take a stand against anti-Semitism, believe it's important that people in their organisation or their sector or their department receive training on anti-Semitism, and that certainly buoys me. It makes me feel kind of confident that there are good people out there who care about this and want to take action. So yeah, there are those aspects out there of kind of good people wanting to stand up against racism because that's what anti-Semitism is. So that's the counter to a lot of the negativity.
With the war that's happening now and all the negativity that we're seeing, do you think things are as bad as 1930s Germany, or are we nowhere near that?
So I try and avoid those comparisons. I don't think we're in the same place as we were then, the country, but there are definitely worrying kind of signals, red flags when Jews are hounded out of the theatre, when Jewish institutions or when synagogues are being targeted. It's a warning sign, and it's a warning sign about the health of democracy. So I don't think it's exactly the same. I don't think it's a direct comparison, but I do think there are some early red flags and warning signs of a direction of travel, which is why it's so important that there be a zero tolerance approach by governments and police and others across society, indeed every individual, in respect of anti-Semitism, because it indicates anti-Semitism is a threat to national security, to democracy, and yeah, some of the warning signs are there.
With the work that you're doing, are you hopeful for the future?
I'm realistic about the future. So I don't know about hopeful. I'm realistic. I think it is an uphill battle. I think that there is a massive job to do in education. I think we've got a real problem with online safety. And I think that's bigger than anti-Semitism. That's about mis and disinformation. It's about AI. It's about polarization. It's about data. I think that is going to be one of the defining problems of our century. So I am really significantly worried about that. I'm not pessimistic, but I am realistic about the scale of that challenge and the work that's ahead. So I fight on in the knowledge that this isn't going to be easy. I'm not constantly an optimist, but I'm a realist, I'm a pragmatist, and I think we've got a job to do, and I'm not going to give up because that job needs doing and it needs doing well.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about what you're doing?
Oh, that's kind. We're at antisemitism.org.uk or on X on anti-Sem policy and indeed on other social media. But we've got a number of briefings on our website and videos, for example. We've got some humorous videos, we've got interviews and other pieces of information that people might find useful. So yeah, I'd encourage people to visit it and hopefully they'll take something useful, informative, educative away from it.
Okay, Danny, thank you very much.
Ah, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.